Welcome to The Digital Difference with Scott Gulliver and Oliver Moradi. Hello everyone, welcome to episode 8 of The Digital Difference. And you're here with me, Scott Gulliver, and Oliver Moradi. How is it going, Ollie?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Scott. Just trying to avoid melting in this heat wave.
Oh, I know, it's relentless, isn't it, at the moment?
God, it is. I mean, hopefully we'll get out of it soon, though.
Yeah, typical Brits. I mean, everyone's talking about the weather at the moment, aren't they? And we'll never be happy. That's the thing. Like, the rain's now come and that will be here soon enough, and then we'll be wanting good weather again. So, yeah, it's just, this is the story of our life in the UK, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So today we'll be talking about something hopefully a bit more fun than the weather, and that is successful websites as a kind of broad topic. And the reason I wanted to chat about this today, Ollie, was I think you and I in our world still see a lot of companies creating websites almost for the sake of creating websites. We know they're essential these days, and you know it's a requirement for a company at all times. But what we see quite often is that they just miss the mark a lot of the time and actually getting it to be successful. And understanding what makes a successful website isn't rocket science, and actually just having some of the basics in place add up to a big difference in hopefully why a company or a small business or even a person would want to invest in a website to begin with. So I figured that's what we'd dive into today.
Awesome, yeah. It's definitely something that I think needs to be looked at. Like you said, Scott, there's a lot of people out there, or a lot of companies out there who create websites not really knowing the fundamentals of it. So it turns out to just be one of those situations where they create a website for the sake of creating the website, and they don't really get any value from it.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think the things we're going to talk through today apply pretty much to any size of company or organization, or as we said before, from an individual as well. And I think these also apply whether you're using a site builder, getting an agency involved, or even for those kind of larger organizations with maybe in-house development and design teams. I think these fundamentals that we're going to run through today apply to everyone, and they're a good refresher even for those larger teams. So to kick things off, I think broadly it's worth just understanding that effective sites are a blend of kind of both a great piece of design and UX, and that's a fundamental part, but also you can't forget the kind of solid development side as well, and some of the basics that we'll cover off later. What we've seen a lot of the time is that when emphasis, and a lot of this is actually when you can get external agencies involved who maybe don't quite hit the mark, a lot of emphasis is placed on making something look really, really cool, really modern, but it doesn't always hit the mark in terms of either its UX, or it looks great, but then doesn't perform really well. And by perform, I mean, you know, the real-time kind of load of the site. And all of those types of things need to be hitting the mark on some level for it to really feel like a good cohesive site. And this is beyond just whether the site is even meeting your metrics of maybe getting some people through for leads, or getting people to contact you, or even to buy things on your site. So it's worth just quickly having an understanding that you'll need to tackle both sides equally for your site to be good, really.
Yeah, and I kind of think as well that you get this issue with great design, UX, and development. You get these issues where they don't all work because you have too many people involved in the process.
Yep.
And I think that going forward, it might be quite a good practice for people to look at maybe taking up all three of those roles at once. So maybe a developer thinking, right, I might actually develop my design skills and my UX skills in this situation. And I know that kind of spells bad news maybe for digital designers, but at the same time, maybe digital designers can go out and get and upskill themselves in developing. And then from there, you know, you don't need to have too many people working on different sections of the process. You can all have a greater understanding of the whole process in general, and then it can actually come to making a better website, or creating a better website.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And the tools are there as well to help kind of marry those two sides at the moment as well, and make the learning gap between design and development a little bit easier. We talk about,
Definitely.
using frameworks like Webflow. We personally love that as a framework, and there are others out there like that. But those types of platforms where you don't need to dive into coding for every single little problem can be a great way for designers to actually get in and build the site. And equally for developers as well. They're the ones with the skills and the knowledge and the history of really making sites tick on the right fronts. And having some element of design background, or even working closely with the design team, you'll be able to really add a lot to that process. And I think even beyond the tools, there will always be organizations that split that work and dedicate kind of specific skill sets. But I think in those instances, it's really important to have someone perhaps over the top. Traditionally that was kind of been a project manager, but it could even be, the client themselves, or someone within, say, an agency that's kind of leading the project, that really understands both sides well enough and is trying to marry the two throughout the whole process. So the first thing to think about then really is the audience. And this is something we like to try and come back to when we're designing a site, whether that's a site that's being designed from scratch or whether we're coming up against a redesign. And audience will really start to drive everything, ideally. Importantly, you'll hopefully answer the question of why people are coming to your site and what you want them to do there, and also what the user will want to do as well. And ideally, 90% of your hierarchy, your design, your UX should be built around kind of driving people to that goal in the easiest way possible. For some sites like product sites or e-commerce sites, this is quite an easy one. You're typically trying to get people to go and buy things, and the funnels for that are pretty well established. But for other companies, so for example, charities, their goals might not be so black and white, and having something like awareness of the charity or the company, or getting people quickly to the information they need to be able to help the user, for example, is a happy goal that someone can work towards. And that's certainly harder to measure those types of goals, but having an idea of those from the start will really help to really funnel everything you do, again, from the hierarchy of the site and how you lay out your information and the pages even, right through to what type of branding you go for and what type of tone of message you go for on the site. And ideally just try and get 90% of your audience where they need to go quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I also think that, you say about an audience, that's the whole point of creating the website in the first place. So, the first question is, who are my audience, and how do I aim that, and how do I create this doing at that person or at that audience, at that group of people? It is the fundamental question, because without the audience, it's pointless you creating the website. Yeah. So I think before you do anything, like you say, it does need to start here, where you have to ask that question: who am I aiming this at? And that's when you start building around them. I think that is the fundamental question first, before you even start doing anything else. And maybe it means bringing in a couple of people from focus groups from the sort of audience that you want to aim that at. But definitely before you do anything, is establish who your audience is and design and prepare your content around that.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's a bit of a different approach than especially smaller companies will take, where they often have an idea of what they want to say as a company, which is important still, and you need to bear that in mind and try and get that across if it's important. But as you've said, like if it's not hitting the mark with the user itself that's actually going to be visiting the site and that you want to interact with you, then it's largely pointless putting that content up. So coming at it from the audience first is a really great way of just making sure that you're thinking about someone visiting the site rather than just what you've got to say as a company. And the other thing this can hopefully get companies away from as well is treating a website almost like a checkbox exercise of having to have, these 5 bits of information and the price list on there. And again, these, having an idea of what you want is important, but just approaching it with that kind of, let's clear the decks and really understand our audience first of all before we go ahead with the site, can be a great way just to make sure you're quite clear about what you're designing and what you're intending to get from the site as well. And the other thing as well is, of course, that especially with redesigns, I think this is super important. Redesigns are a great opportunity, or kind of a rehash of a website is a great opportunity to learn from what your current website is doing, and potentially just again have a bit of a rethink about who it's currently speaking to and who you should be speaking to. And that might be quite a different and quite a gap. And I think this is a great point as well, before you dive into design and development, or even getting people on board to help with that, is having a think about, are we just redesigning for the sake of it, or is there a real goal to this? And if it's not improving things like conversions or sales or speaking to the audience better, then is there really a need to redesign? And you should be getting something back from any investment in your website, even if that's ongoing maintenance and tweaks, and just having an idea of how it's going to impact the bottom line and your business goals is a great way of doing that. And quite often that can be just as simple as, we know that our audience are a little bit more modern than maybe our website is making us look, and just literally redesigning the content and the images and the visuals might be a great way to connect with them better. It doesn't have to be a complete hierarchy rehash every time. But again, just it's a nice way to have a think about what you're going to be actually attacking during this, and not just treating it as a, let's modernize the website for the sake of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the main problems that companies continue to create for themselves is they have this product they've created, this website, and it works perfectly, and then they go and try and be too clever, and they try and add these new sections, these new applications to this website, and all of a sudden it breaks constantly and the UX falls apart, and you just think, what was the point in changing it? It was much better before. And to me, it's kind of like companies trying to be a bit too clever and not keeping things simple. And I think keeping things simple is the best way to go forward. Of course, there is also a time when you do need to redesign, even if something is working perfectly. And that is when you want to modernize your website. I think that if you build a website in 95 and you're still running it today, it may work perfectly. I doubt it does, but even if it did work perfectly, I can guarantee the design is way out of fashion, if you will, or out of the modern trend of modern brands and stuff like that. So immediately you wouldn't be showing off that professionalism that you might want to be portraying. So I think that there are times where you should redesign, just even if there isn't any value except for just looking a bit more professional. But yeah, if something works, don't change it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, as well, looking at your competition in the market might be a good way to see where you currently stand. And standing out actually with an outdated design might not be such a bad thing, but you don't want it to look so outdated that it looks amateur or unprofessional. So that's definitely a consideration as well. And going back to the mixed messaging that you kind of mentioned as well, I think a lot of that can come, you're absolutely right, from like drip feeding changes in as time goes on. What we see with quite a lot of websites is they'll start off with a very specific kind of laser focused purpose about them, and then as maybe more audiences come in, or as they need to like bulk things on, they'll just get them in. And actually this is where like a complete rethink of how the website's structured can really pay dividends, because what you want to try and avoid is mixed messaging that misses the point for everyone. And like there's always going to be a couple of audiences at the very least for any company, even if that's just from like a consumer side and then maybe a B2B side, or a corporate or press side for that matter. And you've got to kind of speak to those audiences separately, but in the same way you want things like your landing page to be kind of pretty focused on your core mission and your core audience, because you want to try and please everyone at the same time, but not muddy the waters enough that your messaging's kind of unclear and not specific enough, because that really will harm you for the most part.
Absolutely.
And then following on from audience and having a good understanding of that, the next thing really to do is to start to fold in your hopefully well-established brand and voice already. And this is where I think template builders and kind of site builders they certainly have their place in the world, and certainly for simpler websites, they're often the way to go that can be pretty cost effective. But for a website that's really showing off your brand at the heart of it, you're going to want to look to some sort of customization, and whether that be completely custom development or using kind of a mix of the two. And I think the fundamental thing to remember here is that you need to be able to represent your brand, especially if it's pretty well established and you've got a good audience already, in a way that's showing it off, but also that's pretty representative of what you've already got. And folding things like colors and typography are one thing, but then also have a think about how you're representing yourself through your website, what type of things you're talking about, what messaging you're using. And quite often, especially now that social is so prevalent and we're using social marketing every day, we see quite a different tone of voice between the social marketing side and the website side. And websites can still feel pretty kind of robotic and stale quite a lot of the time. I think it's super important to like try and fold some of your personality, especially for those smaller companies, into your website. You know, make it fresh, make it fun, and hopefully start to speak to the exact same audience you're speaking to now, and grow that audience through both channels.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. And I think, again, using those words fresh and fun and, you know, imagery and stuff like that. But the key thing you need to take out from there is that with brand, a lot of that is, you know, colors, imagery, logos, things like that. And you have to remember that the brain processes images and colors 6,000 times faster than it will process words. So even when you talk about brand and you think, oh yeah, well, you know, I can create one color and I can put a couple of images on there and a logo, and, you know, that'll be fine. And the rest of it I can just kind of explain within text and words and stuff like that. That's not really the best way of, again, from this brand voice perspective, of showcasing who you are. And it's not the most effective way either. So I think that, you know, when you're going into creating a website and things like that, your brand has to portray your voice, and like it has to be that number one thing when you come onto a website, or when your user comes onto a website, they immediately see who you are and what your personality is. And so, you know, focusing a lot on your brand is very, very important. Very important.
Yeah, exactly. I think using those kind of fundamentals of the visual side of things can be a great way just to reflect the story of you as a company as well. You know, it may be that fun and light works for some companies, but for others, a more serious and kind of professional looking site is going to be the way to go. But as you kind of alluded to as well, sites are a pretty visual thing these days. And I think more and more people start to kind of stamp that picture in their mind of your site when they land on it for the first time. And again, like template builders certainly have their place, but if you're really wanting to bring your personality through to your website, having something which really sets it apart is a great way to go. Even just little things like layout of the page and hierarchy, even just because the brand logo is up in the top left, for example, if it doesn't feel like your company, it can just feel slightly off to people that are visiting you for the first time, especially if they know you well from other places. Maybe they visited your store or your site or bought one of your products. And if that doesn't translate to the whole kind of experience you get from the website, then that can really, as I say, just feel off. It can just feel a little bit kind of disconnected to the user. And, you know, it's a subtle thing, but that goes to play into the whole kind of brand loyalty and brand expectation side of thing as well. So it's definitely something to think about. And again, this is like a great opportunity when you're thinking about your site as a whole to be a bit more creative about how you can approach things here. And it's getting easier and easier to really make things truly custom. You know, it's never been better on the web front. So having some expertise in that area can really pay off.
Absolutely. And I think it's like you just said there, Scott, it's going onto a website and making it memorable immediately. You know, you want your users to come onto the website and think, oh, you know, this is them, this is who they are. Like, not even without any words, not without a logo. You want someone to go onto a website, see a color, for instance, and immediately make that as your representation. You know, associate that with you. And I think that it's quite difficult to do that, especially to make a good brand. I'm not saying that it's easy, and, you know, we're not saying like doing all this stuff is actually easy, and you know, you'll go through many different versions of different brand prototypes and things like that, but you will come to it eventually where it does showcase who you are and what you do. And that's when it becomes a bit more memorable for your users.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly. And so the next thing to think about as a whole, I think, is the hierarchy and content of the site. Um, Again, these kind of follow on really as a bit of a process. But once you've got a good understanding of why people are coming to your site and who they are, you can start to really pick out the kind of key themes and key areas and key actions you want them to take. So getting people to the information that they need is critical. And that might not just be the quickest way. You know, that there are kind of old UX myths around the fewest clicks, which really doesn't have too much impact anymore. It can often just be like, what's the easiest way for people to get to it? And that can be kind of clear actions and other bits and pieces. And another great way to do this is to fold in content that really engages people as well. So along with just having the bare bones on there, and that can certainly be an effective tactic sometimes, having really engaging content can be pretty key to keeping people around for the long term.
Yep, definitely, Scott. And I think another thing right here is to have a range of content. Don't just stick to one thing. So, don't make your website, video might be amazing at the moment and people might be loving video, and it might be at the moment very, very easy to upload to streaming sites and, rack a video from your streaming site and host it onto your website and things like that. So, people, I see it more and more that people are using video everywhere. But if you just focus solely on, say, video, for instance, and I know I'm using this just as an example, it can really mess up your site. So, the content won't be as engaging. So always use a range of different content, focus on podcasts, use text where you need to use text, use video where you need to use video. It doesn't matter, just always keep a range, and because different people learn in different ways, different people will connect to your content in different ways. So having that range of content will just ensure that you connect to all people within your audience.
And going back to our last episode about storytelling, that can be a great way to think about how you might generate this content as well. It doesn't just need to be content based around your core services or core message, but it can be, stuff around really trying to bring people on board to your brand or your purpose. And you can do that through, as you say, like a variety of means. And the more the better. You'll speak to a wider audience. And these things can take time as well. It takes time to generate content, and some are more labor intensive than others. But with a lot of content, you can try and juice it in a way. If you create a video, then you can translate that into a nice blog article, pick out the highlights there. You can grab bits and share them on social and link back to the original content. You could even, as you say, then make that and boil that down into maybe an audio podcast or something. And we talk about kind of websites being a cornerstone a lot. And I think that's really where they start to sit these days more and more, is as you have all these other social platforms around the outside that are continuing to grow and be more and more important, it's super essential to bring that all back together with a really good website that highlights that content.
Yeah, and I also think it's really important to have that sort of, like I said, that regular content generation, Scott. I mean, it's one thing where people also expect certain content from you. So just to continue to have that content that you're continuously producing, and it's that reliable content that you continue to produce, that people keep coming back for as well. It's kind of creating a fan base, if you will, for different pieces of content, and people will rely on you for that, and through that you get a bit of like brand loyalty, if you will, just by the sort of content that you do produce. So I think it's also really important to have that sort of regular content that you keep producing that people know you're reliable for. Totally,
yeah. With kind of the social platforms and the kind of content sharing platforms, they're all geared around new content, aren't they? Historic content quickly falls off the radar with a lot of those. So it's, as you said, it's really key to growing an audience. And actually, your website can be a great place to store some of that historic stuff, though, especially good blog articles or kind of in-depth pieces, and even more historic videos and things. They can be a great place to link out to them from, so that people that are visiting you afresh or even trying to find more of the content they love can come to you and easily find that information. And of course, it's great, especially if it's up to date for things like SEO and all that good stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so to kind of round that off, we've, hierarchy and content itself is a big piece, but in terms of bringing this back to making a website successful, They are really key points in helping people to convert. And this is a great side of things that you can measure in the long term. And you can also learn from your past sites and interactions with your customers as well, to really tailor this in the future. So moving on from hierarchy and content, the next real thing to think about is having clear actions. And by actions, I mean how we get people to where they need to be, really. So having a good understanding of the audience, first of all, as we've done at the start, will give us an idea of what goals we want them to achieve. And there might be multiple goals, but those goals might be things like we want the user to be able to purchase a product. We want them to contact us. That's a great way to get people, like especially with the B2B side of things, through to some sort of goal. It might even be things like visiting your social channels and other content that you've got as well. But having a good idea of that goal and then translating that into basically two things. One is having a really clear value proposition, and having that front and center, normally on your landing page, would be a great way to put that. And then having clear buttons or other actions to be able to actually go and fulfill those goals. And the great thing about these actions are they're also a nice thing that you can measure, especially when you tie them into things like Google Analytics or other analytics platforms, and get an idea of how many people come to the site and how many people are funneling through the right channels. And you can change things like just little things, even like the labels on your kind of call to action buttons, as they're known, can be a great way of actually driving people to the right places and having a clear way to help them out.
Yeah, and I think it goes back again to what I was saying earlier, Scott, about having like these focus groups initially, and it's listening to these focus groups and actually creating actions from these focus groups.
Yeah.
That first step is like kind of like listening to feedback and actively seeking it. And I think that is so important, because the end goal is to make the user happy. So your first goal should be what would make the user happy. And to understand that is to actually go out and find that user. So creating an action or clear action from getting that user feedback is very, very important in the initial stages. And, I think that, yeah, definitely like using, analyzing that data that you take from your audiences. You don't have to have a massive focus group either. Just try and get a range of different people, and then just try and create clear actions from there. Would probably be the best thing to start off with. It just makes sure that everything kind of will be produced effectively going forward. Otherwise, you might start creating something and designing something, and it just, like certain websites which just won't work. So, create those clear actions definitely from feedback.
Yeah, and things like those focus groups as well, that might be the difference in, for example, you having a buy now button right front and center on your homepage after a little description of a product. And actually the focus group might tell you that the more effective way to sell that product might be to get people actually over to your newsletter or your social channels, or maybe a free piece of content or a free product. And then they're much more likely to buy at a later stage. And this will change for every company and will be different. But you're right that talking to those focus groups might actually help understand what their buying habits are a little bit better, or how they are more likely to interact with the website. Because we're inundated, daily with lots of kind of really scammy websites and things that just aren't worth our time. And it's, we're not in the same world we were 5-10 years ago, where we could sell easily with adverts and other things just for products as we do now. So getting people to different kind of routes to basically fulfill the same end goals might be a really creative way of kind of driving conversion. And then, another thing as well is to be kind of prominent here, but without being overbearing. Actions should be clear, really, and we don't want to bury them in too much text. Ideally, we don't want, we want actions to kind of breathe in a design and be pretty clear. But they shouldn't be too overbearing and putting people off. Extreme example of this would be, the kind of like flashing buy now button, and that's a very specific example. But all actions should be pretty clear, but not too over the top. And using just intuition here is a great first step. Use your experience as a consumer elsewhere, or as a user of other websites, and see what you like and what you don't like. hopefully as someone in your business, you'll already understand your audience well enough that you can actually apply that learning to know what they would like to see on the site as well. But then of course you can go further as well, and start listening to things like feedback and actively seeking feedback as well. Speak to your customers, ask if they've seen your website, and get some real feedback on it and what they would change. And then, an advanced tactic here is to, again, use analytics, which is, it does take time, but can really pay off in the long run, especially for high value websites. So most of what we talked about so far is really thinking about the design primarily. And as we kind of talked about right at the start, it's important to also get just the fundamentals of well, not just design, but also development right as well. So there are some basics here that we worth just looking at across the board. And you can do things like measure your current site. And this goes for any site really, even if it's something that you're not planning a redesign on. These basics hopefully are things that you can improve with small little tweaks. So performance is a big one, actually loading the site quickly. And this can be as simple as reducing some of the heavy content you've got on the site, but also using practices like progressive loading. So for example, if you've got really, really big images that need to load in, maybe the site can function for a while without them as they load in behind the scenes. And providing just a base experience for basically anyone, regardless of their network connection, is a great thing to aim for. Testing this in the wild is a great step as well. So often we're kind of building and designing websites, and we're looking at them on our laptops or PCs on a pretty decent home connection. But go out in the wild, take your mobile outside and see what it loads like on a network that's not your home network. This is important for anyone really, whether you're an agency building a website, whether you're building a website for yourself, whether you're building one internally, or maybe you're the client and you've just been handed a website by someone building it for you. This is a great little test just to see exactly what it looks like for quite a big audience of your users as well. Another good basic to think about is accessibility. So we've covered this in previous episodes, but accessibility or good accessibility can help everyone. It's not just for handling cases where people have specific disabilities. In a busy modern world, having an experience that's easy for everyone really will help everyone out. So also there's the great thing of just trying to be inclusive here and really thinking about all of your audience and not just the main subset that are at home with quite a lot of time to browse your site. So, and accessibility along with performance are two of the basics that are not just essential for things like SEO, but just good for good UX as well. And they're essentially the same. Sites like Google are ranking things more and more these days based on the actual user experience and how people are finding them. They use various metrics for that, including how long people stay on your site, how easy it is for them to get to the content they need. And most of them, or certainly a lot of them, will be underpinned by the performance and the accessibility of the site.
Absolutely. And it's going back to that user experience, we spoke about earlier. Again, it's the fundamental question that you need to ask at the beginning of building a website, and as we said before, a clear action. What does the user want? How are they going to use it? And if you don't have a good UX and your site isn't accessible, the user's not going to use it. And that is the basic. That is the basic of the website, is getting that user in to buy a product, for instance, if you're doing it for that, or to view any of your content that you have. And if the user can't do that easily, then there's no point in the user actually doing it and user coming to your website whatsoever. So there's no point in you building it. This is a basic that really needs to be right. And if you don't get those fundamentals in, your site's just not going to work, and it's just not going to be effective.
There's just too much competition out there, isn't there, that people won't put up basically with the site that doesn't work very well. And then, there are some other basics as well, just to think about, that basically represent the quality of your brand and your site. Things like making sure your images aren't blurry across all devices, making sure that the site actually performs well across lots of devices as well. So on mobiles, on tablets, on PCs, and whatever other formats people are browsing them on these days. Having a good idea of basically those basics of what you think about when you think of a quality site will be a good thing to replicate in your own, and to make sure you're not putting people off or misrepresenting your brand.
And I think this is an issue that we see with a lot of people now having the accessibility to sites like Webflow.
Yeah.
is that they think that they can go in and design a website without any experience and or any knowledge of like digital tools. So you'll see this a lot with smaller companies or people making sites around their one-man business, for instance, and it often doesn't work because they haven't got an understanding of digital, and how to do simple things like upload a good enough like GIF or video, or to upload content that is good quality. So a lot of people just like kind of copy it from Google Images or something like that, not really understanding file formats and file sizes and things like that. So they'll get a lot of loading issues and quality issues. And I think that's where you need to go out and get like a basic understanding for yourself about how these things work before you go out and create a website yourself.
You're right. It does show, when things just aren't quite right, even if it's just feeling slightly off. So again, just like making sure the quality is good is important, I think. Another necessary evil part of websites, or sometimes evil, unfortunately, is SEO. And this, can be a part that's quite often missed with websites these days. The great thing about SEO, or search engine optimization, essentially making your website visible to people who need to get to it through web searches, is that in some ways, it's getting a lot easier for pretty much anyone to do this quite naturally. So in the old days, we used to have to go to experts to make sure that we had the right keywords in place. And some of that is still important sometimes, but quite often you can get away with this just by creating very good content and UX that's really geared towards your audience. And a great way to do this is just spinning up something like a blog, and kind of creating articles that are really engaging to your audience. And it might not even be a blog, it might be other types of content as well, things like YouTube videos, or any other format really. And blending these with a good social presence and platform is a great way to kind of naturally and organically start to drive people to your site. And that all goes to help SEO, immeasurably really. Is a really good thing to be doing. And another thing to think about as well is that SEO shouldn't just be an afterthought and something you tack on once the website's been built. You can think about this right from the start and really build it into the whole design. So even things like typography and design can go a ways to keeping people engaged on your site and reducing things like the bounce rate. So people that visit one page and then decide not to go elsewhere on your site. And again, those are good indications to search engines that your content is relevant and reliable and trustworthy. So having a think about that in the design from the start is a really great way to make sure that you're going to get successful SEO without having to put a lot of work in afterwards, rejigging things.
And you said it before, Scott, with it being a basic, and it definitely is a basic of any site, because it's that thing that's going to attract new audience, a new sort of audience and new users to your website.
Yeah.
The more popular your website becomes, like I said, with Google, they focus heavily on SEO and UX analytics to boost your ratings within a search engine. So obviously it's very, very important. So you want to focus primarily on getting that SEO content perfect.
And this is where websites really start to shine through, isn't it? Because search is going to be key for a long time still. And actually, it's almost more important than ever to stand out right at the top of the search if you can, where we're seeing a lot more searches now through things like virtual assistants, and a lot of things like Alexa and those types of things. And what people want more than ever is short, snappy results that can be read back to them, or suggestions. And it's a great way to just push people to your content when they need it. And hopefully, if you do it in the right way, people that are visiting your site for either products or services or information will be much more likely to actually engage with that content and hopefully convert as a result of a good SEO strategy. It is, it's a long-term game though. It's not something you're going to get right overnight, but it's a really important thing to focus on, and obviously quite a long-term thing for the website beyond just the initial design. And one key way to do this as well is not just think about your content and your social strategy, but also just dialing in things like the on-page SEO as it's known. So making sure that every page in your website has a good things like description. So there are meta tags, for example, that you can create to help a search engine to understand what your content is about and what your page is about. And making sure that you've got clear answers in your content as well. So making sure that your content isn't just kind of woolly nonsense that rambles for 3 paragraphs, but making sure that you've got short and snappy answers and getting people to the answers they need to their questions is a great way to start getting your pages ranked where they need to be. Okay, so the next big thing is to think about the marketing, and this goes alongside an SEO strategy, I think, and probably fits quite nicely with it, to be honest. So for one, social's king these days, and getting good social channels is a big way to gain a good audience and get people to your site, and also just your brand as well, and get your brand out there. But you can think about as well, especially with a relaunch or a redesign or even a new website that you're creating for the first time, make use of your social channels to really kind of launch this thing. Launch is a big thing that people will celebrate, and people love looking at new sites, especially for brands they know and love. So make use of that event and really kind of ride that wave on your social channels out there.
Yeah, and I can't stress enough how important social channels are to marketing, if not the most important part of marketing nowadays. You think about how much people use their phones, especially just to go onto sort of a social application or a different social platform. People will be using their phones probably 50% of the time to be going onto one of these social platforms. So it's probably the most important place to actually aim your sort of marketing content. And like you said, Scott, launching is a huge event. So when you do relaunching your website, for instance, so if you are going to be creating that, I would suggest launching that across several different platforms, and also use the platforms like applications, or a lot of them will have different functionalities that they can use to sort of promote that. So explore using those as well. Social channels do now have the functionality to promote your business, and they are there as more of a marketing tool for businesses as well now than just as a social platform. So use it, use what's given, what it gives to you, and use what's available, and promote your launch or your relaunch through any social channels.
Yeah, absolutely that. And I think there is advertising in a more traditional way as well, where you can certainly make use of social channels. But I think you're right; it's just about creating an audience first and foremost, and putting good content out there. I think content generation, it really is key these days. It's unfortunately one of the things that can take the longest time, especially if you're in a busy business. There's smaller companies that don't have the resources to help out with that sort of stuff. But just even creating small bits of content regularly to help your audience engage is a great way to keep people coming back to you and thinking about you more often. And that can tie into things like kind of good old email newsletters that are still pretty relevant as far as we're seeing, but also just the ability to put more content onto your site that will be good for things like SEO and driving new searches towards your site. But then also being able to tack that to your kind of existing social audience as well, and keep them engaged and keep them into the conversation. So to wrap up what makes websites successful and some things to think about, I wanted to kind of end on 2 things that go pretty hand in hand, I think, and that's polish and trust. And these things can be pretty important. So by polish, there are basically lots of small things that add up to form an impression, and you can do a lot of smaller things on your site and keep things up to date enough that they will start to form a good impression of trust. And companies and individuals, we all still look to websites primarily as kind of the backbone of trust for a brand. So there are things like social which do form a good kind of personality to a brand, but ultimately when we really want to see whether a company is trustworthy enough, we'll go to a website to establish that. And making sure that you've got the right polish in the right places and you've got all of your kind of bolts tightened down can be a great way just to underline that trust and make you look like a reputable place where people want to spend money, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, it's that polish word that you keep using is perfect, because I think it distances you from that site that's sort of like, if you're operating a website, it's that site that's sort of like clunky, and you can see, we go back to little things like you said before, like maybe images not being that quite high quality, or maybe I don't know, a little animation that you put in that doesn't quite work right. It is just adding those tiny little bits, and it's like you say, all those little bits add up to a website looking professional and a website looking amateur. And I think that, it is just about adding those small little things and going through with a fine tooth comb, if you will, just to try and just make those little bits just pop a little bit more. And little things where you would say to yourself, oh, that'll be all right. It won't be all right. Make it perfect. And that's what will separate you from the box standard websites to the good websites. It's spending the time, and I know it is time consuming to do these kind of things, but spending the time will give you sort of a better standing with your audience, and will also make you seem more professional.
As you said, it can be as small as things like making sure the copyright notice is up to date on the site, to making sure links go where they should, to even making sure that the whole design of the site is repeatable throughout the whole website, and not just you've got pages here and there that look slightly odd or different, and ensuring that everything's on brand. But I think as well, as you mentioned, you can do things to kind of add that extra pop to a website as well, sprinkling little kind of bits of delight, we sometimes call them in the design industry, where you've got little animations or kind of subtle transitions or messages or images in place that just go away to, even if it's more subconsciously, just setting your website apart from some of the competition out there. And then, the final thing I think to think with Polish is the kind of social engagement side again, just making sure that your social messaging and engagement with your audience there is kind of one-to-one with your website, and making sure that everything is linking between the two nicely, and that they're essentially working in sync and not kind of two different platforms that look very different from each other. And again, getting that right just helps to make your audience feel like you've really thought this stuff through. And they may not be actually thinking that, but again, subconsciously, they'll start to form this impression of trust and reliability with you.
Absolutely. And we go back to the point around brand, and it's that sort of, it's mixing all three together, that sort of social marketing, that brand, and sort of your tone of voice as well, and how you portray yourself within your website. And polishing that to make it very unique to who you are as a person, and having your personal touch is really, really important to, again, portraying your company values and who you are through your website.
It all adds up. And as you say, these things take time, but they really will be worth the investment. So I think that about covers it. Hopefully that's been some useful discussion for you guys. And, none of these are difficult things, but they do just add in a layer of thought and intention behind something like a site redesign to make sure that it's really going to be successful, and not just a site that's there for the sake of it, or something you put a lot of money and thought into that isn't really hitting the right notes. So it's definitely worth putting the time and attention into this to make sure that you're getting a good result from your investment, essentially.
Definitely. I think it's just about having that key preparation before we start building the website. Don't just go in head first and think that, right, I've just downloaded Webflow, for instance, and now I'm going to build a website and that's it. It's done. Kind of, put some thought into it, do a bit of prep, really understand what you want and what your user wants. I think that's sort of the main message we're trying to send out here. And then, then once you feel comfortable and once you have, again, a clear action of what you want to do, then start the design. Don't just go in head first.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that kind of wraps us up for today. We'd encourage you all to check out the website at thedidigitaldifference.show. And we'd love it if you told a friend or a colleague if you like the show. We're really trying to reach out our audience at the moment, so we'd really appreciate that. But yeah, we'll be back here in 2 weeks for another one. And thanks so much for listening today.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode. We wanted to let you know a little about our digital agency. We design and build killer experiences and apps. And we also put out a bunch of free content to help companies of all shapes and sizes. Head to fluffdigital.com to find out more.